SUSE and me, that's a long and complicated story. It started back in the 90s with SUSE Linux, and it will continue today when we will have a look at OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. Let's get into it. Hi, this is Carsten with OpenTech, and while you are here, don't forget to like, to subscribe and to hit the notification bell, since it helps. And now let's talk about OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. Let's install it and let's see what it has to offer. The first thing you obviously want to do is to install your operating system. I will install it on my physical laptop with 20 gigabytes of memory and a 256 gigabyte SSD. First of all, you insert the USB drive containing your OpenSUSE installation media. Then the installation starts. It takes a while because the system loads the kernel and does the hardware detection. Once the basic detection phase has been completed, we can select the keyboard and locale settings, and then we will need to do the network setup. As you can see, that screen looks quite destroyed here, and that's not the only screen that looks like that. So yeah, we select our network, we enter the password, and then we can move on from there. Next step is to enable online repositories. We do that, and then the list of online repositories gets downloaded, and we can select the repositories that we want to install software from. Once we are happy with our selection, we hit next, and that list is going to be written to disk and then used using the installation. When you start the installation process, you can then select your preferred desktop or system flavor. With OpenSUSE, all desktop environments are treated equally. They don't have an opinion about which one to prefer over the other. Once you have selected your desktop environment, we can have a look at the partitioning. As you can see here, the partitioning will delete the current existing partitions and create a new partition with Btrfs. And since I'm a huge fan of Btrfs, I like that a lot. Once you are happy with that, hit next. Then the synchronization with the NTP server happens. That takes a few seconds, and now we can go and select the time zone that we are in. I'm located in Germany, so I select Germany and then hit next. Now we can create the user account. So I enter the username and give it a password, and I deactivate the automatic login option since I don't like that. Now we can have a look at what is going to be installed, which software is going to be installed, which default system target is set up, which security settings are set, and which network configuration has been made. Once we are happy with that, we hit install, and once we have confirmed that we actually want to install things, we need to have a bit of patience. The actual installation process takes quite a long time, typically between 25 and up to 40 minutes. So stay relaxed and wait for it to finish. Once it is finished, you can and have to restart the system, and then you can boot into your new OpenSUSE Tumbleweed Linux distribution. One of the first things you want to do with your newly installed operating system is to perform a system update. Let's do that using the Software Center. So we hit the super key and search for software. We open the application and switch to the Updates section. Here we already have an update being available, so we check that one and let it install. If you want to install your system updates using the command line, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed has a solution for you as well. Open the terminal and enter sudo zypper update, and then the system will download the available updates and will install it. Depending on your network speed, obviously that process might take a while. In the end, and as with every bigger update, I recommend to reboot the system. Now we can come to the initial customizations. So we open the Settings app, and after having had a short view at network and Bluetooth settings, we will switch over to the Appearance section. Here we can toggle between light and dark mode, and we can adjust the wallpaper. Unfortunately, only one wallpaper is provided out of the box, so you would need to download additional wallpapers to your liking. Once you have downloaded those wallpapers, you can just select them and apply them, and then have a great background with your system. The next interesting section is the multitasking section. Here we can define the behavior of the active corners and the workspaces, and we can define how the workspace management is laid out on a multi-monitor setup. I'm fine with the default settings here, so nothing to change. In the display section, you can obviously adjust the display settings. The system per default runs on the Wayland desktop. As you can see, there's no option for fractional scaling out of the box, but you can at least toggle between 100% and 200% scales. In the mouse and touchpad section, you can enable and disable natural scrolling and obviously do some more settings. And once you are happy with what you've selected and configured, you can close the settings and open the GNOME Tweaks tool. Great thing is, that one is installed out of the box. So when you then open the GNOME Tweaks tool, you can customize the appearance, you can customize the fonts, keyboard and mouse settings to your liking here as well. Also, you are able to add and remove startup applications, and you can customize your top bar. I typically enable the display of seconds and weekdays plus week numbers within the calendar. Within the window title bar section, you can enable maximize and minimize title bar buttons, and you can change their placement. I prefer to have the maximize and minimize buttons being enabled and being available on the right side of the window. And within the Windows section, we will enable the Center New Windows option, so new windows will come up in the center of the screen. Let's now have a look at the sound and Bluetooth settings. Typically, those settings are amongst those providing the biggest challenges to the installation of an operating system. But here with OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, my Bluetooth worked flawlessly out of the box. I was able to connect to my Bluetooth headphones, and also the sound worked without any issues out of the box. Another area typically being a bit challenging towards different distributions is the printer setup. And unfortunately, it is very challenging to set up my HP network printer with OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. You need to download the HP lib utility using Zypper or the Software Center. And once you have installed that utility, you can enjoy the beauty of its user interface. So we start the HP device manager, which was installed earlier on, and we hit Setup Device. Now we select Network, Ethernet, Wireless Network, and hit the Show Advanced Options button. Then we check Manual Discovery and enter the IP address of our printer. After a while, the utility discovers the printer. We hit Next, and then we can hit the Add Printer button. Now we need to authenticate with the root account and its password, and then and only then the printer is installed. And as you can see, that is quite a challenging and messy process. It is more complicated than it has to be, and it is definitely not a nice experience. When you want to install software, you can use basically two different kinds of repositories. One is the OpenSUSE and community provided repositories, and the other is Flathub. To install software from Flathub, although you have direct support for Flatpaks within the system, you need to add the Flathub to the list of repositories. So we do that. We need to authenticate here, and once we have done that, we can then use the Flatpak utility to install programs from the Flathub. So we enter the ID of OBS Studio and then confirm that we want to install it. We need to authenticate once again, and after a while, OBS Studio will be installed. If you don't want to install software from the command line, the Software Center is your place to go. So we open the Software Center, and now we can search for applications. In this case, I'm searching for Microsoft Teams, and as you can see, it is provided from the Flathub. I hit the install button. I will need to authenticate myself, and once I did that, Teams is going to be installed. Once installed, I hit the Open button, and now I have a working Teams setup. I obviously need to log into Teams, and after having done that, I can work with the application. What I do is I head over to the settings and configure the video camera. Nice guy waving at you. And then there is YAST. YAST is pretty prevalent within OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. YAST stands for Yet Another Setup Tool, and YAST was the component setting SUSE Linux back in its days apart from any other distribution, since with YAST, installation was way more simple and straightforward than with the other distributions of that time. YAST later on evolved into YAST 2, and that YAST2 tool is pretty much everywhere. It is the installer that you use to install OpenSUSE Tumbleweed with, and you can use it to completely configure and maintain your system. We will now have a look at using YAST to install additional software, since from my perspective, that is the only use case where that tool today still makes a lot of sense. So we start the YAST Control Center and hit on Add-on Products. Here we hit the Add button, and now we select the source of our new install. We select Community Repositories, we hit Next, and then we can check the repositories we want to use. I check each repository so I have more choice. I then probably need to import some GPG keys, and once I have done that, I can hit View and select Patterns, and as you can see here, I am now able to scroll through a list of already predefined patterns or use cases, and then basically select the use cases or patterns I want to install. If you are not happy with finding what you want to install using the patterns, well, you can also use the search. If we want to install the checked components, we will head over to the Installation Summary tab. Here we now can see what we have selected, and once we are happy with the selection, we will hit the Accept button. We will now be presented with the list of automatic changes. We accept that as well, and then the installation is performed. As with each and every installation within the OpenSUSE Tumbleweed Cosmos, that one takes quite a while. In the end, we are presented with an installation report. We hit Finish, and now we can perform the same operations again. But frankly, that is about it. I would not use other functionalities of YAST, since that is mostly a duplicate of already existing and today more standard conformant functionalities. Something I do very often is taking screenshots with my desktop operating systems, so obviously I look into those features and functionalities as well. With OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, when you press the print button on your keyboard, the GNOME 42 screenshot utility starts. You can easily use it to select an area of the screen, and then you hit the capture button, and then your screenshot is captured. But there's also an alternative to that. If you hit the super key and search for screenshot, you notice that you have two screenshot utilities at your disposal. So we now open the older screenshot utility and hit selection, and then hit take a screenshot. And then we can use our mouse to select the area of the screen which should contain a screenshot, and then we can just take it. It works as intended, but frankly, I don't understand why we need to have two screenshot utilities. There are not many things giving me more joy after having installed a Linux distribution as to run the Neofetch utility. It is my small little reward. So we do that here, and we are now presented with the nice OpenSUSE Tumbleweed logo. And as you can see, we are running GNOME 42 and we run it on bare metal. Great. I'm a huge fan of monitoring my resource utilization. I want my operating system to be as frugal as possible. So after having installed OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, I started the HTOP tool, and as you can see, it's quite pleasant what we can see here. The memory is between 850 megabytes and 1 gigabyte, and the cores are pretty much idle most of the time. When it comes to disk utilization, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is unfortunately not that frugal. That is because there is a lot of software already installed, and it's quite a useful selection, by the way, but it eats up a bit of storage, as you can see. So our OpenSUSE Tumbleweed installation takes up between 8 and 10 gigabytes typically, depending on what you have installed and which desktop you have chosen during your installation. Not great, but storage is quite cheap, so I'm okay with that. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is a rock-solid distribution, but there are so many small bugs and annoyances, specifically when installing the platform. So let's have a look at those things to get a feeling of what we have to deal with. One of the very obvious things is how slow the installation process is actually happening. You see here in real time a part of the initial installation process, and it takes a lot of time. The installation process with OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is roughly 2 or 3 times the length of that of other distributions. So not a great experience here. Speaking of experience, you see a lot of graphic glitches with the YAST installer. And that's from time to time not nice looking, and very often it's actually quite confusing. So that is not a good experience either. Then there is a bug with setting the host name of your installation. Fact is, you simply cannot do that. From the GNOME settings tool, you are able to change the name, but if you then restart the tool, you will notice that the name is still the previous one. Small bug, but very annoying. Another thing that troubled me is inconsistency within the system. So if you open your browser, you are greeted with a start page, and if you search within the start page, you get redirected to DuckDuckGo, which I personally like a lot. But then enter a search term in the address bar, and guess what? You are now redirected to Google. Why? I don't get it. And then there is the wallpaper issue. I mean, it's not that hard to download additional wallpapers, but if you look at the average Joe, they expect some wallpapers being present and not being greeted with a green background when switching to the dark theme and having to download additional wallpapers. Okay, then the question. What did I like? What was like okayish? And what did I not like at all? First of all, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is a rolling distribution, and I love rolling distributions, so you always have the latest and greatest of software. Being a rolling distribution, it is still very solid, very stable, and very fluent. It is a lot of fun to work with the system. It does not get unstable. You feel good when your OpenSUSE is up and running. Also, I like the useful software collection with the system. You just install it and you have a lot of software at your disposal, and you just can start working without having to download additional tools. That is great. And I like adding additional software with YAST. Frankly, I don't like YAST at all, but the ability of being able to add even complex software packages with YAST is great. It works quite well. So then, what was okay-ish but needs improvement? Well, first of all, those graphical glitches when using YAST or the YAST installers. That makes it hard for everyone to work with the system. You can live with that, you can work around that, but it is not nice. Also, when having a look at the bugs, the system could use a bit more polishment and refinement. Things like not being able to change the host name or not being provided with additional wallpapers are not so nice. Again, you can live with those things, there are workarounds, so no major issues there, but it does not feel nice. And again, the system feels quite inconsistent. There is that Firefox inconsistency, but also having pretty much every option being doubled with YAST is not a nice thing. What didn't I like at all? Well, first of all, YAST. Sorry, I have to say that. YAST was a great tool in the 90s and the early 2000s. But in 2022, it feels very outdated. It does not behave well. It has a lot of glitches, as already pointed out, and it just clutters your system. Also, the printer installation. Why? Why isn't it working out of the box as with every other Linux distribution? I don't get it. And finally, the speed when installing things. It is not just related to network speed. I don't have the best of networks, admittedly, but frankly, with other distributions, it is half the time, a third of the time whenever you install things. Then, finally, would I personally use and recommend OpenSUSE Tumbleweed to other people? Well, let's answer the first part of the question. Yeah, I would definitely use OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. In fact, I still have it on my notebook and I use it and I like using it. It is a great operating system. Once it is installed and configured, it is based on Btrfs file system, so I'm happy. That is what I like to see with my Linux distribution. Would I recommend it to other people? No, it is way too complex to install for the average Joe. It is a rolling distribution, which makes it hard to recommend for those looking for a more stable system. For me, it worked great. I love it, I like it, even though it is still a complicated thing with me and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. So what do you make out of that? Would you like to use OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, although the installation process is quite messy? Would you agree with me that OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is a great distribution, or do you feel more at home with other distributions? Let me know in the comments below. And while you are there, don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to hit the notification bell, since it helps. Thanks for watching, see you next time, and don't forget, let's make the world a better place, now more than ever. Thanks for dropping by, see you later. Bye.